In early 1940, Norway, with its strategic location and access to important natural resources, became a prized target of both the German and British navies. Both countries would fight to be the victor. Rudi Tepfer was aboard a German destroyer. It was here where he met the enemy, on the battlefront. By late 1939, Hitler's tank forces have overtaken Poland and are headed for France. But to keep the German war machine going, natural resources must be constantly available. One of these necessities is iron ore. Nestled along the coast of Norway are ports through which such resources can be shipped to Germany, unless the British get there first. In early 1940, Norway, up to now a neutral country, becomes a strategic location for both Germany and England. After a British destroyer attacks a German predator ship in neutral waters and frees 300 English prisoners, Hitler realizes he must take Norway quickly. He schedules an invasion for April 9th. The German plan is to simultaneously occupy ports along a 1,000-mile stretch of Norwegian coastline. Oslo in the south, Trondheim in the middle, and Narvik in the north. It'll be the first combined land, sea, and air operation in history.
Norway was important to the British for several reasons. First, Germany drew much of its iron ore, much of the surplus iron ore it depended on for war making, from Sweden. Secondly, and arguably even more important, the British hoped to frustrate the German youth of the Norwegian coastline to send out surface raiders and naval squadrons.
In late March, Britain starts secret preparations to lay mines in neutral Norwegian waters to cut the German supply line. Also, an occupying force is made ready to invade strategic Norwegian ports. At the same time, from northern German seaports, troops begin to depart. On board a German ship headed for Norway is 21-year-old Lieutenant Rudi Tepfer.
On the 6th of April, 1940, 10 of our destroyers assembled in Bremerhaven, and nobody knew what was going on. Our destroyers had a crew of 350 Navy personnel. And in addition to that, we got more than 200 mountaineers from a mountain division from Austria. Our first thing was to occupy Norway because England wanted to do that. We knew that by our intelligence, because they were afraid that our submarines could come out of the German Bay into the Atlantic. In 2.5 days, by very stormy weather, we drove high speed up to northern Norway, north of the polar circle, to Narvik.
The British government, even again before the Germans attacked, was putting pressure on Norway to adopt a more favorable stance towards Great Britain.
But when the British receive reports of a large German fleet moving toward Norway, the Admiralty issues an order to seek out the German ships and engage them in battle. The German ability to decode messages of British naval movements enable them to avoid their pursuers. Every effort to stop the German invasion fails. Along the fjord leading to Oslo, outdated Norwegian strongholds are easily neutralized by German naval and air bombardment. At Oslo, the main airfield is taken without resistance. By noon on April 8th, 1,500 German troops march victoriously through the streets of Norway's capital. At historic Trondheim, 2 old forts protecting the entrance to the harbor are quickly taken. German troops now have control of this city as well. In the early morning on April 9th, 2 German destroyer flotillas enter the Vestafjord approach to Narvik. 2 Norwegian ships are ordered to surrender. They are unwilling to give in. The German response comes in the form of a fierce shelling.
We occupied the harbor and released our mountaineers so that they could get any Norwegian resistance. But the Norwegian didn't really resist because they were not sure were we the English or were we the Germans. And so they were hesitant, and we had an easy way to occupy Narvik and all the military outposts in the environment. There was no bloodshed and no casualty at all.
In just one day, the Germans have accomplished all their military objectives. Whatever Norwegian resistance there is sabotaged by collaborators. Communications between units are disrupted, and all countermeasures against the invading Germans fail. Former Defense Minister Vidkun Quisling has made a secret pact with the Germans to allow them easy entry. From this time on, the name Quisling becomes synonymous with traitor. On April 11th, 2 days after the German occupation of Norway, a British invasion force belatedly sets out to sea.
The British plans are really almost entirely improvised. Units are taken from everywhere. Troops are frequently not told where they're going. Even their company and regimental commanders do not know exactly where they're going. Many ships are poorly loaded so that the things you need most, like radios, would be at the bottom of the hold, and material you need less would be more accessible. When the British respond, they put force structures together like you glue toothpicks to make a sculpture, and with no more intrinsic strength. The ships they use are the ones that are available at the time. And the Royal Navy at this stage is very badly overstretched. When you talk about British strategy in Norway, about the only thing they could think of to do was stop the Germans wherever they were. The British, in other words, were reacting to the German initiatives, and the Germans were on the ground and able to move faster.
April 13th, 1940, a British strike force heads into the German-held Norwegian port of Narvik for the first major face-off of the war. April 13th, 1940, a powerful British task force makes its final approach to Narvik.
The English came with destroyers because they had all their forces outside prepared for that occupation of northern Norway. Most of our destroyers were in the harbor. Some of them were not. My destroyer was not there either. And the English fired blindly into the harbor sinking 3 of our destroyers and sunk them, and they also sunk 14 merchant ships of different nationalities. We in the fjord, which we are about an hour away from it, heard that gunfire in the morning. We speeded in the direction of that gunfire and fell the English in the flank. And they were surprised because they didn't expect us. Then the next day, the English came with aircraft carrier and a battleship, several cruisers, and they finished us up because the cruiser gun, they could reach us. They kept out of reach from our smaller destroyer guns. So we were sunk about a mile out of the shoreline. When the order came from the skipper to abandon ship, we jumped into the water. I swam to one of the rafts, but that was overcrowded. Was later on anyway caught by the English, taken prisoners, and I tried to reach the shore.
The British counterattack at Narvik is, in narrow tactical terms, a great success. They sink almost half of the German Navy's destroyers at the loss of only 3 of their own, but the problem is the Germans are still holding Narvik. When British troops began landing at various points of the Norwegian coast, the main impression offered to the soldiers and the junior officers was one of confusion. On the whole, the British were lacking transport, they were lacking winter clothes, they were lacking the kind of foodstuffs you need to keep going in Arctic areas and in rough country. And from the various ports, these British units are sent forward with about the only mission being find the Germans, fight them, and defeat them. The average British column had almost no ability to maneuver in Norway's mountains.
The Germans rush reinforcements into southern Norway. Meanwhile, British troops land unopposed in the central part of the country. On April 18th, a German division leaves from Oslo, heading north to join up with forces holding Trondheim.
The mountaineers were all scattered around, and they formed a defense line to prevent the English from capturing Narvik. And they did a marvelous job. We knew that we had only to do that for 2-3 days, we thought, because the German army came through all of Norway to Narvik. And it was said that they would be there in 3 days, maybe 4 days. But it took them 2 weeks, because there are no roads up there. And even up there where we were, there was not a road.
While the German army is penetrating more deeply into Norway, the traitor Quisling is removed from his governmental position and replaced. The new governing council immediately declares war on Germany. There are Norwegian troops resisting the Germans, but outnumbered and outgunned, they are unable to halt the enemy advance.
Within a predictable period of time, German attack planes and light bombers would be bombing and strafing roads, and it was very difficult to get off the road. There was nowhere to run to in this mountainous coastal area. So you develop a situation in which just about everybody has a stiff neck from looking skyward and looking to the rear.
Within 5 days, Germans have joined their 2 invading armies in Oslo and Trondheim. All of central and southern Norway is now under German control. The Germans flex their military might and take British prisoners of war.
I was captured at Forberg by the Germans. From there I came to Littlehammer. And we had a supper. Consisted of brown bread, gorgonzola, wine, which the Germans gave to us, cigarettes, and hot meal each day. And getting on fairly decent. And I hope the war will soon be over and we'll all be going back home.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary.
On May 27th, an Allied force moves by sea for a direct assault on Narvik.
As the campaign progresses, the British are primarily concerned with reconquering and holding Narvik and preventing a complete German victory. As the central sector falls more and more under German control, Narvik is seen by the British and French as the key to their successful completion of the campaign.
To take Narvik from the rear is impossible because of the mountains. We don't even bother to put up a defense line from that direction. Our mountaineers always choose a higher position, so they will be above when the enemy approaches. The whole population has left Narvik because of the British shelling the town. They all went to their ski huts in the mountains. They know we won't give up easily. Whatever the English want, they will have to get by fighting their way through.
British put together an expeditionary corps, and the main thing, they have to get our landing craft. The attack on Narvik is the first time that the British use modern landing craft, because the British understand that, and the French understand as well, that it's going to have to be an opposed landing, and you can't do this in an improvised fashion.
The Germans in the hills around Narvik are commanded by a mountain troops officer who uses the rugged terrain for cover. He doesn't want to give the British Navy any targets. But the British will not continue to hold Narvik. With Allied armies retreating from the Germans in France, orders are issued for an immediate withdrawal from Norway.
Within a few days, it becomes obvious that Narvik is now a sideshow of a sideshow, and it is pointless to continue the campaign. So the French and British withdraw, and the ordinary British expressing themselves in words more colorful than polite. Many of his superior officers aren't very happy as well with this either.
The Luftwaffe renews its air attacks as the troops are loaded aboard ships.
Germans, well, their destroyers are all gone, and their air transports are overstretched. And the German general pulls out a large handkerchief, mops his brow, and offers thanks.
Only one Allied objective remains in Norway, the destruction of Narvik's port facilities. Over a period of 5 days, the Allied evacuation is completed. By June 8th, all 25,000 French and British troops are aboard transports and on their way to England.
British morale was at rock bottom. In some ways, the Norway morale was even worse than those who come out of Dunkirk, because the Narvik Expeditionary Force said we were pulled away from a victory, that it was ours.
Rudi Tepfer stays in Norway with the occupying force before returning to Germany and being reassigned to U-boat duty. Although the Germans can bask in the glory of their victory, it is not without losses.
Each of our destroyers had a crew of a little bit more than 300 sailors each. And of these, only half of them made it after the second battle in Norway. The others died.
2 days after the evacuation, Norway surrenders. It is a fortuitous but decisive German victory.
Poland, September 1939. The German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II. Poland's 34 million inhabitants, crushed, scattered, and enslaved. Tens of thousands of square miles of territory shrink before the movement of lightning-armored columns. Poland and the world learn the meaning of a grim new word, blitzkrieg. Here is shown the initiation of that phase of modern warfare. These pictures of the preparation for attack and later the actual combat were all made by German frontline cameramen. Therefore, they stress Nazi superiority. Success is unimpeded as Hitler's divisions move against outnumbered Polish defenders. Later, on other world battlefronts, the Allies are to destroy the myth of the invincibility of the Nazi armies. But this is Hitler at the peak of his armed might, and the record of a nation overrun in just days is of military as well as historical importance. The spark is set off in the free city of Danzig. Nazi secret agents had long plotted the revolt against law and order. Germany called it liberation. The world knew that Danzig represented the ignition of the European powder keg, the excuse for Hitler's hordes to begin their destructive campaign of conquest. Here is the historic last stand of Danzig's loyal defenders. They're entrenched in the city's post office and under repeated fire of Nazi-trained militiamen. Taking cover behind an advancing tank, the attackers move in. Gasoline is sprayed on the building, and its doom is sealed. On September 1st, Danzig is incorporated into the Reich, and all Europe is aflame. World War II is a reality. Nazi regulars move up. The Germans brazenly call it counterattack with pursuit. The civilized world knows it as the unleashing of unheard-of military might. With little to stand in their way, the Nazi divisions roar across the Polish countryside and reveal for the first time the machines and weapons that are to terrorize a freedom-loving people. Military observers see the Nazi lightning warfare as setting the style for modern battle. Only a well-devised counter-blitz can stem the flanking and pincer movements of the wily Germans. The motorcycles bring up machine gunners for the opening of the attack. Camouflage is used to best advantage. Tanks speed the advance as a Polish town is about to fall. Before the day is out, the Nazis have occupied the town, which is still burning and in complete ruins. Wrecked equipment testifies to the Polish rout. There's no halt in the wrecked town. The military timetable calls for the rushing up of troops for more blitz attacks. The German strategy is to isolate Polish forces as quickly as possible. So the Nazi columns move according to prearranged schedule. 30 to 37 miles per day is the German claim. A strategic bridge across the Vistula River has been blown up by retreating Polish soldiers. But in their haste, they were unable to ensure its complete destruction. The enemy will be delayed, but temporary repair is not impossible for skilled mechanics to accomplish in fast time. A German sapper detachment sent ahead of the fighting unit goes to work. These men are trained to construct emergency roads as well as bridges. The hastily constructed span is quickly put to use by the advancing Nazis. Many units don't even wait for the repairs. When bridges are scarce, shallow waters are forded. The blitz-minded German generals even defy fatigue. Long lines of tired troops are kept moving against the Poles. The operation is based on the principle that contact once made should never be lost. Naps are snatched on the move. complete halt comes only during the lull between battle movements. At all times, weapons are kept clean and ready for instant use. This enemy of ours has mastered every technique necessary to the maintenance of efficient fighting contingents. The Polish harbor of Gdynia. For the defense of this vital seaport, the Poles have sunk ships to block the entrance of German warships. The Nazis direct their fire across the harbor. Military and naval forces are cooperating to bring about complete destruction of Polish defense installations. After a thorough bombardment, the outnumbered garrison of Gdynia surrenders. The Nazi air arm plays a major role in the wanton destruction of Polish territory. The method is now a familiar one. First, reconnaissance planes go aloft to secure valuable photographic data. The aerial pictures will show the movement and position of Polish troops, and also the undefended sectors that will supply easy targets for Nazi bombs. Immediately on landing, the valuable pictures are rushed to the field developing unit. Germans have stated that information thus revealed has formed the base for much of their decisive military operations in Poland. This photograph reveals a truck convoy, closely bunched at a crossroads. If proper distance and interval had been kept between vehicles, they would not be the targets shown here. Ground and Air Force raids are worked out with greater unity through the use of the aerial photographs.
Subscribe to take a trip back in time.